The story opens in a small, forgotten village perched on the edge of a conflict zone. The mountains tower above, silent witnesses to decades of fighting. Most soldiers who pass through treated it like a waypoint, a pit stop for water, food, and little else. Sergeant Miller was one of them. Hardened by years of combat tours, he had grown skeptical of civilians in war zones. To him, they were either frightened innocents or silent collaborators, nothing in between. He had stopped believing in hidden heroes long ago. That's why, when he first saw her, he didn't think twice. She was sitting on a wooden stool outside a crumbling clay house, her hands coated with dust as she stacked cracked bricks. Dressed in a plain gray tunic, hair tied back under a scarf, she looked like any other villager, weary, quiet, unremarkable. Miller barely spared her a glance as his unit marched through the marketplace. But there was something in her eyes. They weren't the eyes of a civilian simply trying to survive. They followed everything. Every soldier's stride, every weapon slung over a shoulder, every gesture exchanged between Miller's men. Calculating. Sharp. When one of the younger privates muttered, "She's pretty," for a villager, Miller snapped at him to shut up. Still, he found himself stealing a second look. The girl didn't flinch under his stare. Instead, she met his eyes directly and held them as though testing him. That night, Miller's squad set up camp near the edge of the village. The villagers kept their distance, wary but compliant. Fires flickered in clay ovens, the smell of bread drifting through the cool mountain air. But the girl, the one with the piercing eyes, didn't fade into the background like the rest. She appeared again at the well, drawing water with steady hands. Later, he spotted her helping an old man carry sacks of grain. Always quiet, always watchful. When Miller asked the local interpreter about her, the man shrugged. She lost her family years ago. Lives alone. Keeps to herself. A civilian. Nothing more. Miller wanted to believe that. But something nagged at him. Civilians avoided soldiers, bowed their heads, averted their eyes. She didn't. She studied them. The feeling only grew stronger when the gunfire started. It began just before dawn. The sky was still painted in pale hues when the first crack of a rifle echoed across the valley. A bullet ricocheted off a nearby wall, sending Miller's men scrambling. Shouts filled the air. Villagers dove for cover. Contact. North Ridge. A private yelled, pointing to the line of jagged rocks that overlooked the village. Miller cursed. It was a perfect vantage point. Whoever had set up there knew the terrain and the patrol routes. The ambush was clean, calculated. His men returned fire, but the enemy had the high ground. Within seconds, they were pinned down, forced into narrow alleys as bullets ripped through the morning silence. Dust filled the air, chickens scattered, children screamed. Miller ducked behind a mud wall, barking orders into his radio, when he saw movement to his left. The girl. She wasn't hiding like the rest of the villagers. Instead, she sprinted across the open courtyard with terrifying focus. Her scarf slipped loose, revealing strands of dark hair whipping in the wind. And in her hands, impossibly, she carried a rifle. Not just any rifle, a battered Dragunov, the kind insurgents favored in the mountains. She handled it like it belonged to her, like it was an extension of her body. Miller's first thought was betrayal. She was one of them, he thought, a hidden fighter waiting for the chance to strike. His finger tightened on the trigger as he raised his weapon toward her. But then she dropped to the ground, sliding into a prone position with practiced ease. Her movements were too fluid, too disciplined. And then came the shot. The sound cracked like thunder, louder than the rest. And, for a moment, everything seemed to stop. Up on the ridge, one of the hidden attackers tumbled backward, his rifle clattering against the rocks. Miller blinked. He almost didn't believe it. The girl hadn't fired at his men. She had saved them. Another shot rang out. A second gunman crumpled. The precision was surgical, the timing perfect. Miller's men, seizing the opening, surged forward and drove the rest of the ambushers back. When the last echoes of gunfire faded, Miller found her still lying on the ground, rifle steady in her hands, eyes locked on the ridge, as though daring another shadow to appear. Slowly, he approached her. His men watched, rifles raised, uncertain whether to treat her as ally or threat. Finally, she looked up at him. Her eyes burned with something fierce, something unshakable. "I told you," she said in a low voice, calm despite the smoke and chaos around them. "I'm not just a civilian." For the first time in years, Miller felt his hardened certainty crack. Whoever she was, she had just changed everything. The aftermath of the ambush left the village smoldering in tension. Dust still floated in the morning air, blending with the acrid bite of gunpowder. Miller's squad had driven the attackers back into the ridges, but the cost was visible. One soldier lay wounded with a bullet through his thigh, another nursing a shrapnel cut across his cheek. The villagers peeked out from behind broken doors and cracked windows, murmuring in fear. None dared approach the Americans. None, except her. The girl stood in the courtyard, the Dragunov still in her hands, though she had slung it across her back now, like she had carried it her entire life. Her scarf was gone, lost in the scramble, her dark hair damp with sweat. She didn't look shaken. She looked ready. Miller's men didn't trust her. The younger private, Jenkins, raised his rifle halfway. "Sergeant, she's armed. She could be with them." Miller held up a hand. His gut told him this was different. He stepped closer, scanning her stance. Not trembling, not frantic, calm, deliberate. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" he asked. The girl studied him in silence, her chest rising and falling slowly. Finally, she answered, "My father taught me, before they killed him." The words cut through the air like a blade. Miller recognized the weight behind them. Not boast, not excuse, but history carved in blood. "What's your name?" he pressed. "Layla," she said simply. "That's all you need to know." Before Miller could reply, the interpreter came running, his face pale. "Sergeant, the villagers are whispering. They say she's dangerous. They say she's cursed." "Cursed?" Miller frowned. The interpreter hesitated, then explained. "They say, every time she picks up that rifle, someone dies. Enemy or friend. She has been alone since her family was executed. They fear her. Some call her a protector. Others call her a witch." The squad shifted uneasily. Soldiers were superstitious enough already. Miller's eyes flicked back to Layla. She stood still, listening, her gaze steady, unashamed. "You're saying she's a liability?" Miller asked. The interpreter shrugged helplessly. "I'm saying the village won't accept her as one of them, and maybe neither should you." But Miller wasn't so sure. That evening, as the squad regrouped, Miller found Layla sitting on a broken wall overlooking the valley. The Dragunov rested across her knees. She didn't look at him when he approached. "You don't trust me," she said flatly. "I don't trust anyone out here," Miller replied. "But you saved my men today." Layla's lips curved into something like a bitter smile. "And you wonder why? Why would a girl you thought was a civilian fight for you, instead of against you?" Miller didn't answer. She turned toward him then, her eyes sharp in the fading light. "They kill my family. Men like the ones you fought today. They thought I was weak. But I learned. And I've been waiting. Waiting for what?" "For the right target," she said. Her words chilled him more than the cold mountain wind. But there was no tremor in her voice, no hesitation. Just raw certainty. Miller realized then, Layla wasn't just surviving this war. She was part of it. The next morning, the squad prepared to move out. Their orders were to push deeper into the valley and dismantle the insurgent outposts suspected of orchestrating ambushes. The ridge would have to be cleared. But the question hung heavy. What to do with Layla? "Sergeant, she's not coming with us," Jenkins protested. "She's not on the roster. She's not one of us." Miller weighed his words carefully. "Yesterday, she kept us alive. That makes her one of us until I say otherwise." Some of the men exchanged doubtful looks, but none argued further. In war, survival spoke louder than regulation. They set out at dawn, the village fading behind them, the trail winding higher into the mountains. Layla moved with them, silent, carrying only her rifle and a small satchel. Her pace never faltered, even as the terrain grew harsh. By midday, they reached a narrow pass. It was the kind of place Miller hated. Too quiet, too still. His instincts screamed danger. And then the mountain erupted. Gunfire tore from the rocks above, rattling like thunder. Bullets chewed into the dirt, sparks leaping from stone. Miller's squad dove for cover, trapped between sheer cliffs and a kill zone. "Ambush!" someone shouted. The enemy had them boxed in. Pinned down behind a jagged boulder, Miller scanned for options. His men were firing back blindly, but the insurgents had perfect elevation. The only way out was to break their line. But that meant someone had to climb the exposed ridge, a suicide run. "I'll go," Jenkins volunteered, though fear shook his voice. "No," Layla said suddenly. The squad turned. She was crouched low, her rifle already in her hands, her eyes fixed on the ridge. "Calm. Steady. They won't expect me," she said simply. Miller hesitated. Every instinct screamed not to risk it, not to trust her. But another look at her eyes silenced his doubts. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't suicidal. She was ready. "Cover her," Miller ordered. Layla moved like water, flowing between rocks, slipping through the chaos. Enemy fire sparked all around her, but she never faltered. She reached a ledge halfway up the ridge and dropped flat, rifle snapping to her shoulder. The first shot silenced a machine gun nest. The second dropped a spotter. With each kill, the pressure on Miller's squad eased. His men surged forward, emboldened. By the time Layla reached the top, the ridge was theirs. The ambush had crumbled under her precision. When it was over, the soldiers stood among the smoking rocks, catching their breath. Jenkins shook his head in disbelief. "She's not just good. She's a damn ghost." Miller turned to Layla. She stood at the ridge's edge, scanning the valley below. For the first time, he thought he saw a flicker of something in her expression. Not pride, not relief. Something darker. A hunger. "You've done this before," he said quietly. Layla didn't answer. She simply adjusted the strap of her rifle, eyes still locked on the horizon. And Miller knew, whatever this girl had been before, she wasn't just a civilian anymore. She was something far more dangerous. Dawn broke cold and gray as the squad assembled for Hawthorne's briefing. Maps spread across the hood of a truck, coffee steaming in tin mugs, the smell of diesel hanging in the air. The general's voice carried weight. "Intel confirms an insurgent command post 3 ridges over. Hardened defenses, heavy weapons, and a key figure coordinating strikes across the sector. Our job is to cut off the head. That's Black Talon." He tapped the map, eyes narrowing. "We go in quiet. Small unit. Surgical strike. Fail, and the valley burns." The men exchanged uneasy glances. They knew the odds. Hawthorne's gaze shifted to Layla. "You'll take point. Your knowledge of the terrain, your aim, they'll decide this mission." Murmurs rippled through the squad. Jenkins finally snapped. "Sir, with respect, she's not one of us. She hasn't earned it." Layla stood, meeting his glare. "I've lost more than you can imagine. My family, my home. Every breath I take is earned." Her voice carried such raw conviction that even Jenkins faltered. The general cut the tension with a curt nod. "It's settled. Wheels up in 2 hours." Before they moved out, Layla slipped away to the edge of camp. Miller followed, finding her kneeling in the dirt, fingers tracing a small symbol, a crescent moon carved into the earth. "What's that?" he asked. "My family's mark," she whispered. "Before every fight, I draw it. A reminder. If I fall, they'll know I didn't forget them." Miller felt something tighten in his chest. War had stripped his men, too, but none carried the weight like her. She wasn't just fighting for survival. She was fighting for memory, for ghosts. "You keep doing that," he said quietly, "and I'll make sure you get the chance to keep remembering." Layla looked up at him then, a flicker of gratitude in her hard gaze. The mission began before dawn. They moved like shadows through the rocks, every step calculated, every breath measured. The valley seemed to hold its breath with them. Hours passed in silence until finally, the insurgent outpost came into view, a nest of sandbags and steel dug into the mountainside, bristling with weapons. Miller signaled his men into position. The general's plan was simple, Layla would mark high-value targets. The squad would eliminate them one by one, and then they'd strike the heart. As Layla adjusted her scope, Miller crouched beside her. "You don't have to do this," he murmured. She didn't look away from the glass. "Yes, I do." Her first shot cracked the dawn, dropping a guard before he even blinked. The second silenced a machine gun. With each pull of the trigger, she carved a path for the squad. But the enemy noticed. Alarms blared, shouts rang out, and suddenly the mountain was alive with fire. "Go!" Miller roared. The squad surged forward, grenades thundering, rifles blazing. Layla stayed high on the ridge, raining precision from above. Every shot was protection, every kill a shield. And then Miller saw it, the target. The commander, dragging his men back into a bunker. This was the head of the serpent. "Layla!" he shouted, pointing. She swung her scope, exhaled, and fired. The commander fell. Silence followed, brief, fragile, but real. The outpost was theirs. But victory didn't bring relief. As the smoke cleared, Layla remained still, her rifle resting across her knees. Miller approached. "You did it. You saved us." She shook her head slowly. "No, not yet. This was only one head. There are more." Her voice was steady, but her eyes glistened in the dawn. Not with triumph, but with an oath. And Miller understood. This wasn't the end of her fight. It was only the beginning. Night fell hard in the valley, wrapping the squad in cold silence. The mountains seemed alive with whispers, wind through the stones, distant echoes that could just as easily be men creeping closer. Miller ordered a tight perimeter, but even with guards posted, unease gnawed at the group. Layla sat apart, sharpening the edge of a bayonet she'd scavenged. The men watched her with sidelong glances. She hadn't spoken since the ambush. Her presence pressed on them like a shadow. "Sergeant," Jenkins muttered, leaning close to Miller, "you really think we can keep dragging her along? What if she turns that rifle on us?" Miller didn't answer. He didn't need to, because at that moment, headlights flared on the ridge road. A convoy rolled in, armored trucks crawling like iron beetles. Dust rose in the moonlight as engines died and boots hit the ground. From the lead vehicle stepped a man in a decorated uniform, broad-shouldered, eyes sharp even under fatigue. General Hawthorne. Miller snapped to attention, his squad following. The general's presence wasn't routine. It meant command was watching closely. Hawthorne's gaze swept the group and stopped on Layla. "Who is she?" His voice cut like a blade. Miller hesitated. "A local, civilian, sir. Helped us in the last 2 engagements. She's a crack shot." "A crack shot." The general stepped closer, studying her like a specimen under glass. "She's carrying a Dragunov. That's no farmer's daughter's weapon." Layla lifted her chin. "I'm not a farmer's daughter." The boldness in her tone startled the men. Soldiers didn't interrupt generals. Civilians definitely didn't. But Hawthorne didn't scold her. Instead, he smiled faintly, almost grimly. "You've been trained," he said. It wasn't a question. Layla's silence was answer enough. The general turned back to Miller. "Do you know what you've stumbled into, Sergeant? This girl isn't a liability. She's a resource. And in this valley, resources are scarce." Miller frowned. "With respect, sir, she's not enlisted. She's not under our command." Hawthorne's eyes hardened. "She is now. Effective immediately. She'll assist in Operation Black Talon." The name hit Miller like ice. Black Talon wasn't whispered among privates or corporals. It was the kind of mission briefings happened behind locked doors. High risk, high value, and often not survivable. Miller swallowed hard. "Sir, she's not ready for something like that." The general's gaze lingered on Layla. "On the contrary, Sergeant, I think she was born ready." That night, Miller found Layla sitting by the dying fire. He crouched beside her. "You know what Black Talon means?" She nodded once. "Yes." Miller searched her face for fear, hesitation, anything. But her eyes were calm, steady. "You want this," he pressed. Layla looked into the flames, her voice low. "What I want doesn't matter. What needs to be done does." And Miller realized then, she wasn't being swept into the current of war. She was swimming straight into it by choice. The squad descended into silence after Black Talon's strike. They had dismantled the insurgent outpost, but victory sat uneasily in their stomachs. The valley was too quiet now, as though holding back something worse. Layla walked apart from the others, her rifle slung, but her eyes scanning every ridge. Miller noticed the way she moved, not like a recruit, not even like a hardened soldier. She carried herself like someone expecting betrayal at every turn. That betrayal came sooner than anyone thought. The radio crackled late that night. Hawthorne's voice filtered through. Rendezvous at Grid 77. Extraction point confirmed. Move immediately. The squad broke camp, weary but alert. But as they moved through the rocks, Layla's steps slowed. She crouched, pressed her ear to the dirt. Something wasn't right. "Stop," she hissed. Jenkins groaned, not again with her super senses. But then, distant rumbling reached them. Not engines, rotors. Multiple helicopters. Miller swore under his breath. Extraction didn't use that many birds. Unless. Ambush. Layla snapped, diving for cover. The first rockets screamed overhead, exploding in the ravine. Men scattered, firing blind into the night. The sound of gunfire echoed across the valley, and shapes poured from the shadows, too many to be coincidence. Hawthorne's voice barked again through the comms. "Hold your ground, squad. Reinforcements inbound." But Miller's blood ran cold. Reinforcements didn't fire rockets at friendlies. Layla grabbed his arm, pulling him down as a burst of fire shredded the rocks where he'd been standing. Her face was pale, furious. "It's him, the general. He sold you out." Miller's gut twisted. It made sense. Hawthorne hadn't just found them by chance. He'd known about Layla, about her past. And now, he wanted her gone. The squad was pinned, morale shattering. Jenkins shouted, "We can't fight this. We're dead men." But Layla stood tall in the chaos, her voice carrying above the gunfire. "No, you're soldiers. You hold until you decide otherwise. If you want to live, follow me." For the first time, Miller saw the men look at her not as a civilian, not as a stranger, but as a leader. They followed. Layla led them through a goat path she alone knew, weaving through rocks, dodging searchlights, outmaneuvering their hunters. Bullets snapped close, shrapnel bit at their heels, but somehow, they broke free of the kill zone. By dawn, they had escaped into a cave system high in the cliffs. The men collapsed, panting, bleeding. Miller pressed his back to the wall, his chest heaving. Layla stood at the cave mouth, eyes locked on the valley below, where enemy forces combed the ground. She whispered something Miller barely caught. "A soldier who betrays his own is worse than the enemy." Miller knew then. She wasn't going to let Hawthorne live. The squad had one day's worth of rations, almost no ammo, and half their men wounded. The situation was hopeless by every military measure. But Layla didn't see hopelessness. She saw clarity. "We don't run," she told them. "We don't hide. We cut the snake's head ourselves." Jenkins scoffed. "You mean go after the general? With what? Rocks and curses?" But Miller stood. His voice was steady, steel hard. "She's right. Hawthorne betrayed us. If we run, we'll die tired. If we fight, maybe we die, but on our terms." For the first time, the squad nodded without argument. Layla laid out the plan. Hawthorne's forces had camped at the airstrip, confident the squad had been destroyed. If they could infiltrate, she could take the shot. One bullet, one man, and the game changed. It was madness, but it was the only path. That night, they moved like phantoms. The moon hid behind clouds as they crawled through scrub and dirt, cutting through perimeter lines, sliding past guards too arrogant to expect survivors. From the ridge above the airstrip, Layla set her rifle down. She adjusted the scope with the care of a jeweler setting a stone. Through the glass, she saw him. Hawthorne, standing tall near the command tent, barking orders, smug as a king. Miller crouched beside her. "Can you do it?" Layla's breath steadied. "He thought I was just a civilian. He thought wrong." She exhaled. The world went silent. Her finger tightened. The rifle cracked. Hawthorne's head snapped back. He crumpled to the dirt, lifeless. Chaos erupted in the camp below. Soldiers shouted, scrambled, searching for the ghost that had just felled their general. But Layla was already packing the rifle, calm as ever. "Move," she said. The squad slipped back into the dark, unseen, untouchable. At dawn, they regrouped in the mountains. Exhausted, battered, but alive. Miller looked at Layla, his voice thick. "You saved us. Again. Why? You don't owe us anything." Layla's eyes softened for the first time. "Because I'm not fighting for myself anymore. I fight so none of you have to carry the weight I carry." The men fell silent. They understood. And though the war wasn't over, though battles still lay ahead, they knew one truth. Layla was no longer just a civilian. She was a soldier, forged by fire, bound by sacrifice. And in the valley's history, whispered among warriors, her name would be etched as the girl who stood against betrayal and never missed the shot that mattered most.